Welcome to another episode of Game Changers for Government Contractors. I am your host, Michael LeJeune, and today we have a very interesting topic we're going to be talking about with Mr. Dave Sterling. So, Dave, before we get in and start talking about your journey in GovCon, why don't you give everybody a little bit of background on who you are and what you do?
Sure thing. Yeah. So founded Royce Geo about 9 years ago in Arlington, Virginia. And we are at heart an advanced analytics firm. Now, that can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. So kind of narrowing down that focus, geospatial intelligence. So how are we taking both terrestrial space-based data, dynamic data at scale, and how are we making a lot of sense out of very large bulk data to answer a very specific, finite, and sometimes very rapidly moving problem set? So that is the core of the company. That's how we started. Primarily really focused on the national side of the house. Think of data you see kind of in behind the scenes that is not necessarily for public consumption. In the last 2 or 3 years, though, we have really focused a tremendous amount of energy on harnessing the explosion of commercial GeoInt. So space-based commercial satellites, SAR imagery, RF, a multitude of ints, and then how to bring that national and that commercial collection picture together to provide the best answer as quick as possible to users that need it now. And that's really our focus.
This is a really interesting, geeky topic for me as somebody who has an analyst background in the SIGINT analyst time frame. So, which is probably like something that doesn't even exist in the military today. I think they were even phasing out my MOS when I was in the military, if that gives you any indication.
Right.
So flash forward 20 something years ago. And, it's one of those things where I love the intelligence and putting the pieces together and all that kind of stuff. So it's a fascinating business for folks like myself, for sure. And anybody who's former military. What made you choose this out of all the businesses you could start and work in? Why this versus selling IT services or laptops and widgets? Like how'd you get into this one?
Yeah. So you rewind the clock just a little bit. Grew up on the water, commercial fishing family, was exposed to GPS and a lot of things around mapping, and ended up going into school and got 2 degrees in geography and GIS, geographic information systems. So kind of the early background, really understanding navigation and why certain things happen in certain places, for commercial fishing purposes, kind of really gravitated towards that in college, and then ultimately ended up working in federal service for the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. So a nice kind of easy transition if you really think about it. As a government employee, every day was like a dream job. You were learning something new. You were seeing something you never saw before, especially as a young 20 something fresh out of grad school. But I was really drawn to the business side of intelligence, and ended up left the government, worked for a mid-major type defense intelligence firm, did a lot of work in the SIGINT cyber side of the house, and then also GeoInt. So got to see both of those worlds, how they came together. So deep appreciation for tradecraft, customer mission, and then really how to build businesses, grow contracts, acquisitions. We bought like 16 firms when I was there. So really just got this MBA, if you will, of intelligence and how to build a company. With this mid-major firm called KEYW. They've since been acquired by Jacobs years ago. And in 2015, I felt like I was really armed with all the knowledge that I could really need to kind of get going. And that's when I really started the journey with Royce Geo.
Wow. That's awesome. There's a lot to be said for going to school for certain things, but man, the education you get on the ground when you're in a company that is moving quickly, and especially one that is going through acquisitions, you learn things in a company like that you won't learn in another company when you're watching the moves they make and what is important to growth, what is important to acquiring a company, why this one over that one, how you're doing the due diligence around it. You get to see things and understand the metrics behind what makes a successful company. And you won't get that education in a lab anywhere. It's so important to me to see people go through that. When you joined the company, give me an idea. So that was about 9 years ago from time we're recording here. How big was the company then when you joined?
So Royce Geo It was
Yeah.
one guy. It was me.
One guy. It was one guy. It was you.
So yeah, so really left with the idea that, hey, I've got really good understanding and knowledge of tradecraft. What our customers, partners at like the NGA and other agencies and commands that are really looking for in the geospatial intelligence world. So it came up as a, senior analyst, got really good insight to a lot of different problem sets, saw a lot of the gaps, saw a lot of things that were working. Then worked, as I mentioned, for 6 years with a mid-sized company, as you said. If I hadn't done that job, I wouldn't be here today running a company, because to your point, really learned how to accelerate technology capabilities, build a strategy. What are we truly going to be when we grow up? And that was something that I spent a lot of time really honing for about 2 years until I started Royce in 2015. So out of the gate, we were going to be an advanced analytics firm. We were going to do the job of 3 analysts with 1 person. We were going to do it with automation, with both government tools, and we were going to figure out how to build our own suite of capabilities as well internally to really upgun performance. At the end of the day, really reduce that cognitive burden. So what do I mean by that? Like, instead of looking through 1,000 million row columns of Excel spreadsheets, how are you building capabilities, tools to take this dynamic persisting data that's coming in, put it in a repetitive cycle to spit outputs as new data is flowing through the system, intel while you sleep. That was really the approach. And we've never deviated from that from day one. Now, have we built like an IT services component that's very mission focused? 100%. But at the core business at the end of the day is, one, getting folks as far forward to the mission set as possible. You really only know what's going on unless you're at the edge. I truly believe that. Our first hire was someone we hired on a Monday, put on a plane Monday night to Afghanistan. Wow. So that kind of set the tempo for the company. And then from there, started building up a core presence in both IT services, intel operations, and in the last 3 years, put a tremendous amount of focus on what we call pure advanced analytics. So this is looking at more of the commercial GeoEnt data space and how to apply that data at scale against traditionally classified national intelligence problem sets. So how do you do a job that was once in the SCIF? Do it completely outside in your corporate office, all with commercial and classified data. And that has been a huge shift for the company in terms of momentum, traction with new customers, really being able to glean insights and being able to kind of try, fail, and retry faster, because we're building now a lot of our own capability, our own tools. And quite frankly, we would have never gotten to that point unless you had that 20 years of tradecraft expertise, really walking the halls, really understanding what's making these customers tick and what are some problems that you think you can tackle that, quite frankly, industry has kind of missed as a whole. That is a nice insertion point for you to say, hey, I see this problem. I think we can answer it, and here's how. And you kind of do a lot of stuff when no one's looking. And that's been really core to us in our success.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you started in 2015, 1 employee. Today, you're how big?
Just shy of about 150. Fortunately, we got a bunch of good hires coming in this month. So we're going to be probably teetering up around 150 by the end of this month into early June. And this year
revenue wise?
Revenue wise, this year we should be somewhere north well into the 50s. That's what I'm hoping.
Nice. So in about 9 years, 1 to 150 employees, 0 into the 50s or more in revenue and growing. What do you feel like? Well, let me back up and say this. First off, congratulations, because most people never see these numbers. That's one thing. And 2, it's what do you feel like? I know you've alluded to it a little bit, like walking the halls, doing some work in the background, things like that. What do you feel are like those handful of keys to success to catapult the company to where you are?
Right. So do what you know. I've talked to a lot of entrepreneurs and folks that have come through the intelligence community and, quite frankly, chasing a lot of different opportunities, hoping that one will strike to kind of act as that catalyst to get the company going. And I've seen them operate as 6 to 10 to 20 employees for about 5 to 6 to 7, 8 years. For us, it was, don't let the distractions get in the way of your vision. And that vision should be what you really understand better than anybody in the room. So we've maintained a very laser-like focus on what we've wanted to be. That is step 1. 2, You only get that by, if you are not the subject matter expert or the trade craftsman that has those good customer relationships that can really dissect a problem, you need to go find those people in your network that also believe in your vision. A lot of times you hire senior level folks and they have kind of their idea of the world. But in the end of the day, some of those different ideas the ideas that differ than yours can also be good. But as a leader, you've got to really be able to dissect those and say, okay, we'll take about half of your ideas. The rest of them really kind of deviate from what we want to do, get buy-in on that. And then those people can act as a catalyst for your vision. So for example, when we started, we were lucky. We went from about 0 to 80 employees in the first 2.5, almost 3 years, primarily with just me as the sole overhead person. So a lot of hiring. Brought in a couple of outsiders, really aligned with the vision, could really help manage programs, manage people, took a lot of burden off of me so I could actually get back to selling and running a company. And then from there, just started adding those building blocks, hiring, a 20 plus year chief growth officer that I knew for 20 plus years. So our alignment was very, very tight. And then bringing in this operational person to run this portfolio, and then a senior level HR individual. And then just kind of those blocks. The next thing you know, the growth starts outpacing kind of your overhead expenditure. So you can see these key investments start taking place. But at the end of the day, you've got to get vision alignment. And what do you want to be when you grow up? And these folks that you're bringing in most cases aren't cheap. They have to be aligned with that vision, because if you start getting folks that stray off the path, you're spending more time trying to corral them in opposed to just going out and winning new business. And that's been a very, very critical for us. And probably the last piece of that is then when do you start making the key investments, not necessarily in people in some cases, but for us, we started investing in technology. So how are we building our own homegrown tech to really, I mentioned, look at like the commercial GeoEnt data landscape. How are we building our own technology to harness that at speed and scale and make sense of all this information and be able to sell that intelligence as a service back into the customer space? So that's been a huge pivot point for us, especially in the last couple of years. So it's really no one thing, and it takes time. That's another thing too. I've gotten a lot of questions. When does it hit? Well, we'll see.
When it hits.
When it hits, right? You have to put these pieces together in a little bit of a logical order. And I've seen some folks do it very quickly and have grown very quickly. You've been wildly successful and couldn't be happier for them. And that is not the norm. I think at the end of the day, this is the long game we're playing here. And folks that are just trying to get a quick win here or there, that's not how you build an enduring business with real capabilities that's differentiated from the rest of the herd.
Yeah, no, I've watched some companies, and it's really interesting when you step back where a company, you think they're going to take off, and 2, 3, 4, 5 years later, you're like, wow, they're still at like 6 employees. What's going on over there? And then you see another company and you're not sure what's going to happen. And you're like, last year when I talked to them, they were like 5 employees and now they have 200. Like what's going on? And then, but the norm is it takes a long time.
Yep.
And there's a lot of different struggles, on your first point there about doing what you're good at, like that one thing. What tips do you have for people that hear that? And there's 2 questions that go through their mind. One is, I don't know what I'm good at. So how do I focus? Like, I'm good at a lot of things. So where do I focus? That's usually the first question. And the second question is, how do you stop all of those bright, shiny objects? Because they're sitting there saying, well, I'm good at about 6 things. And this is the one I'm passionate about, but there's an opportunity to do this and it might pay the bill. I'm not sure if it's going to pay the bills, but it might pay the bills. So I think those are kind of 2 things that most people in those early stages are struggling with. Like, which one do I put, all the chips on, right? Like, where do I put all my money? And then how do I stop the distractions?
Yeah, sure. So the first question, it's kind of a loaded question in the sense that you could be really good at something, but if you don't have a good relationship or a customer knowledge, especially one that is buying what you're good at, you've kind of hit a roadblock. So you really have to understand the market, if you will. Maybe you're really good at this kind of comms device that you know the Marine Corps or some other group uses, and you've got tie-ins there. That's going to be your kind of your starting point, and you're going to start scaling your business out on services that sort of nest and mesh in with whatever that core thing is. For us, it was doing geospatial intelligence, and NGA is the market leader or the functional manager for that within the Intel community. Having worked in that agency, coming out of that agency, selling back into that agency, I wouldn't say it was easy, but I kind of had a leg up because I knew doors that would open. I knew kind of the key problems, what to go tackle, what to invest money and time in, where there's certain programs that were going to pop up that I knew I never had a chance of winning, because the market landscape, it's set, there's good incumbent positioning. So it's kind of really understanding deep, kind of 2-3 layers deep within that program or that problem set. What are the key players? What are the key problems? What buying power do they have? It's no one thing. It's really understanding all the different dynamics within that market that really that get to the point where someone is willing to give you $1 for your work. Now, for the shiny objects thing, it almost goes back to the point I made in the first question. It's being unapologetically ruthless about knowing what you're going to be and really sticking to your guns on, this is the thing that we're going to focus on. Now, at some point, you may have to cut the cord and pivot, because what I mentioned earlier, you could be really good at a core capability, but maybe that requirement's being sunset, or this capability is really not, the customer that is something they're divesting from, or someone else in another agency's kind of stepped up as the lead for that. You then have to make that hard right turn and start figuring out how to open up doors in that other group to go basically sell your capabilities. Early on, teaming is your best path to success. It's really understanding who's that prime and what do you offer them that's different than any other subcontractor they have in their pool that they're going to use to go tackle a big program. For us in the early days, it was having worked inside one particular agency for 15 years and knew all the underlying issues and the players and personalities, whether it was IT services or Intel analytics or data engineering or collection. It was kind of being fairly well-rounded in a lot of different things, which gave us the ability to kind of insert ourselves in different programs, all within the same customer base, within the same agency. So I was able to start build a little bit of a diverse portfolio, but doing not just one thing. But I stayed very focused to the geospatial mission. Now, I will even say today, even as roughly about 150 person company, we've spent a lot of time getting our eggs out of one basket and putting it into others. But being able to replicate like IT services, that's a very challenging topic to replicate at scale in other places, because most of those contracts come in as very, very large, big prime, big LSI type bids for us in particular, where we have a hard time kind of lifting this work out of one agency, and then let's go tackle this problem in a different 3-letter agency where you're going head to head against multi-billion-dollar companies. IT services, I'm not going to say they're commoditized, but everyone is doing a lot of the same thing. For us, our focus has been advanced analytics, where we're kind of looking at the world a little differently, where we understand the data and the mission sets and the trade craft. So that's where we feel like we have a very good advantage to go head to head against very large companies and actually win. So you've got to know where you've got that it factor. And that's, again, where you've got that one thing that you understand better than anybody else around you. That's what you go all in on. And everything else, quite frankly, is just noise.
Yeah. It's wild to me to even see companies that are in the 50, 100 million. We've even seen clients in the $1 billion range where they don't know who they want to be when they grow up.
Yeah.
Like, it's a struggle. And the more they come back to that one fundamental of, well, what is the one thing we do?
Right.
Like it's just like in any time when you see a sports team struggling and the coach goes, all right, we're going to get back to the basics, the very basics of how we do this. And they come back to that and go, oh, they get that clarity on who they are and what they do. That's when there's always some sort of just acceleration of the business to some degree. And so really good points there. You mentioned something as well about as you were prepping to launch the business. You said you launched it in 2015, but you spent 2 years
Mhm.
prepping this. So you had a vision and everything. It, can you put your finger on like a couple of things you did in that prep that you found, number one, were like, man, this was key to us launching good?
Yeah.
And also on the flip side of that, if you were able to go back, are there
Mhm.
one or two things that are like, man, I wish we'd have done this because we'd have started even faster?
Yeah, sure. So I was in a very fortunate position, which will be hard for others probably to replicate. So I mentioned I was with this firm. We were buying a lot of companies in a 5, 6 year period. I had the opportunity to really become good friends with about 4 to 5 different CEOs of 100 to 150 person firms. So I talked to them. Hey, first question, what didn't work? And then what did work? And then I started building this playbook in about a 2 year period of, hey, this is when we started investing in this. This is when we bought this kind of system. Don't spend your money on this the first couple of years. Really don't buy a BD person year one. Like, there's a lot of kind of gates you need to go through individually to really build the company to where you can start making very smart strategic investments. So I spent about 2 years doing that. And then I kind of put the pen to paper to the idea back, even prior to that, probably 4 or 5 years prior, but didn't get serious about it until around 2013 time period. So that was step one. Step two, when I launched, having this playbook in hand, it really was a good accelerant for me to know what to back into, what to do, what not to do. If I was to say, kind of looking back at my 2015 self, I would have taken a little bit more risk in terms of outlaying dollars on certain people, especially leaders of people. You start growing onesie twosie programs. Guess what? That is now something you have to invest your time in. You've got to care and feed these things, but at the same time, you need to go sell. So I think identifying a very good operator that you can bring in and try to figure out how to incentivize, because you're in the early stages. Usually you can figure out ways to dangle a carrot to kind of
Mm-hmm.
take them along for the ride. And I would definitely put a lot of focus on, as you mature and you start looking at bringing in some significant hires that are going to be true needle movers that you've got a tremendous amount of trust in, get smart on how you set up incentive strategies for them. We spent a lot of time doing this. It was a very good exercise for us. We learned a lot, but it's one that I've heard kind of from other folks coming to me asking questions, some horror stories on maybe they gave out too much or they did this wrong, and then they end up losing control of the company, and it can go off the rails pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But in the early days, I tell you, find some. If you're not in a position where you've got 7 or 8 former CEOs around you, start building a mentor network. You got to find 2 or 3 guys. You got to go out there and start talking to them before you even, put your open for business sign up, and really start learning how it's run at a tactical level on day one. And the last piece, make sure you're getting paid on day one. That is the most important thing. I heard that from everyone I talked to. If you're going to start, make sure you've got something you can bill against on day one. And I took that to heart. And the first day I opened up, I had something to do, and I was getting paid for it.
Nice.
So, yeah.
Nice. No, really great advice. And it would be interesting to see you publish your playbook at some point. Maybe, build it out and have that as the playbook for the company out there. Maybe you don't want to publish it. I don't know, but that that would
Not
be
yet.
an interesting. um, mentioned a handful of things there that I'll go back to. As you're talking about that, one of the things I found interesting is, as you're growing, especially early on, to
Mhm.
get to 80 people as quickly as you did, you've got to be good at hiring. You got to be good at finding people, sorting through resumes, things like that. Uh, what tips do you have for people that are in that growth mode? They're looking for those high caliber people, because one of the complaints that I see a lot these days, and we've worked with clients on this a little bit to try and help them with it, but it's probably always going to be an issue for some people,
Right.
is somebody looks great on paper and they even interview pretty good,
Right.
and then you get them in and you very quickly find out the honeymoon's over. Like, this is not going to work out. So how did you wind up with a team that big that quick? Like you had to have really honed your hiring process. Did it take 2 or 3 years? Did you out of the gate? Is that one of the keys that you understood out of your playbook of how to hire? Because that's a tricky thing, is how to hire right.
It is. So again, always more than one thing, right? So in the early days, count on referrals. The one or two employees you're able to get, they're your recruiters as well. Some of our best folks, longest enduring tenured employees have been through referrals. It's good to hire people you trust, hire the people they trust. It typically converts pretty well. That was one. Two, this gets back to really focusing, growing a business in what you know. Recruiting then becomes easy because, to your point, your meter for BS, if you will, is pretty high. So you know whether somebody's got it or they don't have it. And then a big part of that is really personality. They could be technically the best person on paper. They could be one of the best at their job. But if they culturally and just attitude, there's not a lot of alignment there for what you want to be, and they're kind of wanting to do their own thing, get rid of them. It's one of the best pieces of advice I can. It doesn't matter if they're billing and you're making a ton of profit on them. In the long run, this will come back to haunt you. And every company's had their share of them. Anybody says they haven't, they're probably not telling the truth. Right. So, we had that big explosive growth, and trust me, we had some people we had to, kind of part ways with because their work ethic, their kind of, alignment with senior management wasn't there. And, say, hey, you're a great person, but you're just not great here. And I think you'll do fine somewhere else. And we let some folks go. So it is what it is.
Yeah. I've seen that as another problem for folks is they're like, well, Jeff is on this contract and he's billing here and the customer likes him, but everyone else hates him. Like he doesn't get along with his coworkers. He thinks he's special and he can do whatever he wants. So he doesn't do his timesheets or whatever the issue is. Right.
Yeah, sure.
And they're like, I feel like we're stuck with Jeff. Like we can't get rid of him because of this issue. And they just they just let it fester. And now the people that are directly adjacent to him, they start suffering, and it just kind of spreads like cancer through a lot of the people. And they always point right back upstream. And they're like, well, you suck as a boss because you're letting this happen. And so I don't like working for you. Like it just spirals out of control. Like the longer they let this go on. So I'm definitely a big fan of Gary Vaynerchuk's comment around, hire fast, but fire faster. Like if it's not working, like everybody needs to move on so that life can go on, because at the heart of the business are the people. And if we don't have the right people, we're going to have some problems somewhere. So,
and by no means do you have to they're one and done. There are leadership things, there's course corrections, there's explaining why, there's really getting that collective buy-in. But at some point, if that alignment isn't there after, several iterations, counseling sessions, to your point, you start looking ineffective as a leader, and therefore they got to go.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a good point you bring up, because I do think some people are very they jumped the gun on some of those. Are like, well, they didn't show up for work, we should fire them. And then some people they haven't shown up for work for 87 days. Should we fire them? It's like, okay, there needs to be a balance to this. And I have actually, my first employee, we had to fire off of one incident, but I was like, this incident was such an issue, like culturally, morally, ethically. I'm like, you don't get another shot. That's right. You just don't. But that to me was a rare incident where that doesn't happen very often, where they do one thing and you're like, wow, that was, not only was it an incident, it was public, right? So they did something at an event. Yeah. And I was like, yeah, you can't recover from this as an employee because you stepped over a line. You just can't, right? But most of the time there is an opportunity to correct that and move on. So yeah, I appreciate that. Any final thoughts for folks that are in a similar situation, as far as they've been in it for a while, maybe they're your size or a little bit smaller, or maybe it's the new guy who's thinking about doing this, and you're like, hey, here's my final parting words of wisdom here for you.
Yeah. Get comfortable with being uncomfortable, and take some risks on folks that you view as peer talent. Like, hey, they're going to be expensive. They're really going to impact the bottom line. that was probably one of the biggest hurdles. Personally, you're trying to run a profitable, not a very profitable, just a profitable business in the early days, because you've got, lean rates, and, customer this is, whatever the programs may be. Sometimes you're not printing cash like you envisioned you were going to do on day one. You will have lean years, but one of the things that I think was a big tipping point for us was getting very comfortable paying good money for people that you knew had an established track record, respected you, understood and respected the vision, where you get that an instant alignment. Those are the people you don't walk to go get. You run and you bring your checkbook, because those people will turn into catalysts. It's a 1+1=3 exercise. And we have, in about the last 4 years, I've gotten very comfortable doing this, because I'm seeing this kind of play out. Like, hey, this is a known person, a known guy or gal. They're proven operators. They know what they're doing. They know the customer. They may not even have like operations, tradecraft, and growth experience, but maybe they have 2 of the 3, or one that is just so superior. It will usually convert with enough time and enough iterations and reps. And then that's, as leaders and also peer leaders, you huddle around that new hire, you give him the tools of what they need. And typically within 2 months, they're running at the same speed as everyone else. I've seen it time and time again. So am I telling someone with a company of 50 people, go hire 5 program managers and 2 business developers? No. Take the building block, do one at a time, and then trust and verify. And then make sure you're kind of building that alignment. And you're going to get to a point where that next big challenge, next big hurdle is, once you've got a room full of peers, if you will, or senior level talent, you're going to spend a tremendous amount of time on, all right, everyone's got the collective vision. We know where the mountaintop is, but you might have 3, 4 folks that have their different version of the route to get there. The goal is to get them kind of on that same path, so they know why you're investing in certain things, why you want to run programs a certain way. And also, don't always make it your decision. You're going to go a lot further letting them kind of come up with the idea, and then you sort of course correct along the way. But in the end, you're creating that team-wide ownership of, you all collectively own the problem and you own the solution. And that's where things will really take off. So but kind of distilling back to the first point, find that right person. If you believe in them, trust them. Don't be afraid to spend money on them in the early days. It will definitely make your life a lot better. The business won't run you. You actually now have an extra set of hands that can help you run the company. And it's going to make your life a lot easier.
Yeah, that's really important if you actually want downtime to get away from the business, to
Yep.
actually enjoy the fruits of the labor, right? Like, you're not going to be able to do that if you are juggling all the balls yourself. Like, it just
Right.
doesn't work that way. So
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of having the right people around you to do that sort of thing. That's a great tip there for a lot of folks. So thank you for coming on and talking about all this. I know it's going to be really helpful for a lot of people to hear the journey. And for me, hearing you talk about all of the prep you did before you started the journey is like the real gold for a lot of folks, because
Right.
too many of the folks I talk to, they are unhappy with where they are. They hate it. They've been thinking about it, but they haven't done the homework when they pull the trigger on their business. The homework has been, I think this is what I want to do, and I've written my resignation letter. That is for a lot
Yeah.
of folks the prep they've done. And to hear the years of prep and the due diligence that you went through to make sure you launched properly,
Mhm.
it's very clear that that was part of why you were so successful out of the gate. Because again, there's a lot of people that I've talked to that are in their 9th, 10th, 20th year of business, and they're struggling to survive. They may, if they're lucky, have $1 million business and a half dozen employees. So to hear what you've done, it is a testament to the path you took and in that. So I really appreciate that. I think the listeners are going to get a lot out of this episode, and hope to have you on again sometime soon.
Michael, really appreciate the time. Thank you for everything. And yeah, I'd welcome it. Let me know.